On February 11th, 2008, Barbara Ocycle arrived at the hospital 7 minutes early for her shift as an ER nurse. She never anticipated what would happen in those next few minutes.
He came in on a stretcher. I did not see his face. I did not see his wife. And I went to the computer to triage him, and they handed me his license. And it said, Steve DeMoss. And I said, oh my God, I know him.
Early that year, Steve DeMoss was in great health and traveling frequently to Africa with his ministry called Word Indeed. Steve's wife Sharon remembers waking up that morning and finding her husband in distress.
He was lying in the bed and grabbed his arm. His color changed totally, and he said he was in a lot of pain. And the way he was acting, I thought he had had a stroke.
Emergency workers rushed Steve to the hospital where Barbara, their close family friend, was working.
I thought, Lord, just tell everybody to pray for him because he might not make this.
So we initially got a CT of the head, consulted with neurology, and called the pharmacy to start preparing thrombolytic drugs to treat for an acute stroke. Less than 30 minutes later, his condition had changed. He now had nausea and vomiting and a very low blood pressure. That's not consistent with a stroke. It became a very complex case with multiple things that we had to consider.
Dr. Hope ordered multiple tests, including a full body scan. The results were alarming.
His diagnosis was an acute aortic dissection of basically the aortic root through the arch of the aorta down through the descending aorta, involving dissections of the vessels off of the aortic arch and the carotid arteries on both sides.
These are words that put a chill in anybody who speaks them in the emergency room. He was told there was a 4% chance, really, that with this kind of injury, he could live.
Steve's family was called in just before he was rushed to emergency surgery.
By that time, they had him he was intubated, he was totally out. And they said, you better call everybody, he's probably not gonna make it. They need to say goodbye.
During the surgery, friends and family members decided to hold on to hope despite the odds.
There must have been 40 people in the waiting room, and they stayed with us the whole time. And then at one point, everybody gathered in the hallway, and we prayed, for quite a while.
And I sat next to Stacy, his daughter, and I just felt like I should focus on prayer and praying. And I could close my eyes, and I could look at the operating room, and I saw angels on the ceiling of the operating room. And I held on to Stacy, and I said, Stacy, I just feel the angels are in the room with him, and things are going well.
15 minutes later, the surgeon walks out, and I see him out of the corner of my eye, and I know it's got to be bad news because it seemed like an impossible amount of time. He came out and he said he made it.
Although the surgery was a success, Steve was still in critical condition and in a medically induced coma. But the number of people praying for Steve continued to grow.
I can tell you that I know a lot of people were praying for Steve, and they were praying all over the world.
People would send their prayers on Caring Bridge, and I would sit and just read through their prayers. I knew that I was being sustained, that there were people lifting me up and that were carrying me, even when I didn't know what I was supposed to do the next step of the way.
Doctors told Sharon that Steve needed to wake up from the coma within 5 days or he would suffer major brain damage. On the 4th day, he was showing no signs of recovery. She called a local church for prayer.
They came over immediately, and they spent a long time. We worshiped, we prayed together, we held hands, we prayed over him, they anointed him with oil.
By the next morning, Steve was awake and had no signs of brain damage.
I mean, when I woke up, my wife says, do you realize what just happened? I had all these tubes in me and everything. Then my kids came to me, my daughter and one of my sons, and we huddled, and we realized the worst had passed.
I remember just being able to breathe after that, like it was gonna be okay.
That was a pretty joyful realization that God's restored what we had almost lost.
That same afternoon, Steve was walking around the hospital, and he was released just days later.
When I woke up, I heard people were praying all over the world. I have friends in Senegal, Uganda. I really believe that the prayers of the people is what brought me back. It was extremely touching for me. It just made me feel like I'm so glad I'm a part of the body of Christ.
Within 6 weeks, Steve was pitching in a softball tournament, and just 2 months later, he returned to his work in Africa.
I feel like $1 million. I'm in as good or better shape than I was before this all happened.
The very fact that he survived this, let alone survived it without any significant sequelae such as stroke symptoms or kidney failure or paralysis, is quite remarkable.
I don't know how you account for him living. Not just living, but he lives well. He lives healthy. And I don't know if there's really accounting for it outside of really the work of God in his life. He did recover, and it was miraculous.
Prayer is also for you as much as it is for the person you're praying for. Every miracle helped me to know that God was with me every step of the way.
I just believe that God chose to spare me so that I can testify about how amazing He is and the miracles that He does do. God has done way beyond what anybody could have imagined or I could have imagined, and I believe He can do it for you.